Okay, well, good evening and welcome to Expert360's very first Freelancer Financial Wellbeing event. For those who I haven't met just yet, my name is Julia Bageski with the Expert360 team. And my role here in the company is I'm the Consultant Experience Manager. So welcome you all to our homes. We've watched the dramatic shift in the workforce. We've seen the growing demand for highly skilled on-demand workers. And even so, late last year, a stat was released from Australia's Institute Centre of Future Work saying that half of Australia is working in non-permanent positions. So it's growing really, really fast. Many of you will know that core to our vision and mission here at Expert360 is we want to make working for yourself work. And if Expert360 are truly to win and make that happen, we've got a pretty big role to play. We hear every day the different challenges that emerge in the freelance journey. And as I look around the room, I see freelancers that are brand new and others who have done it for a couple of years. And increasingly, the one thing that people ask us for advice on is, how do we kind of understand our financials? How do we make that work for ourselves? Our theme for this evening ties into this: how to make the most of your finances as an independent. Tonight we have here with us two very special guests, Cameron Harris from Macquarie Bank and Kirstin Hunter from Future Super. Thank you both for joining us tonight, and we cannot wait what tips and tricks you have for our consultants this evening. Hopefully you've all received a little gift, a little book from us tonight, so a nice little place for you to save all your tips and tricks. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to jump straight in and hear from Macquarie, closely followed by Future Super. We'll have some questions at the end, and please stay with us for some networking drinks with the night concluding at 8 p.m. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Cameron Harris. Cam is a director in Macquarie Bank's personal banking division. He has over 15 years' experience working in personal banking for one of Australia's most forward-thinking financial institutions. Prior to that, Cam worked in the UK in the equities arm of two global investment banks. It makes total sense that by making your personal banking products work for you, it allows you to do the things that you love the most. So tonight, Cam will share some of the common pitfalls freelancers should be aware of when it comes to their personal finances. So please give a warm welcome to Cam.
Tight. So, thanks very much. I'm here to talk to you about how to make the most of your finances as an independent. Now, that's a really broad topic, as we all know. So, where I come from is Macquarie's retail bank, and retail banking generally means credit cards, transaction accounts, mortgages, things like that, traditional banking. Saying that though, excuse me, the industry has changed massively over the last few years, but largely I'm going to talk to this topic about what we see from a retail banking perspective. You're going to hear from Kirstin later on about the importance of superannuation and all of the awesome stuff that I'm passionate about super. I was telling Kirstin about that before. So you'll hear about that afterwards, but here is really around what we see, some really good practices, tips and tricks about the role of a contractor or a consultant when it comes to personal finances. I really like this slide because it's the shortest disclaimer in the country, although I read it the other day and realised that I'm absolutely on the hook in the bottom line there. It's anyway, you can have a closer read about that one, but all good. So rather than put a agenda in place, I wanted to talk about three themes plus a little bit about some of the benefits that we can bring you as an expert. We were really delighted late last year to form a partnership with Expert360 to provide a comprehensive personal banking offer to you all as experts. So I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But today is around your role as a consultant in the gig economy in relation to borrowing, budgeting, and the important role that your accountant can play. As exciting as accountants are, we see a lot of really cool stuff in these three categories. So I think at the end I've got time for two questions, I think, Julie, is that right? So I'm happy to take those. I've got a couple of colleagues here, including one of our lending specialists as well. We do appreciate that the home loan process for consultants and independents can be a little bit different depending on what you're doing. Now, I thought today I'd put this slide up. Now, it's absolutely not about painting a scene of doom or gloom. It's really about giving you a bit of a background of what the current banking environment looks like in relation to you, and the reason why it is as it is at the moment. That makes sense. Pretty opaque. So the first thing is we've seen residential markets in Australia rise from 2008, the depths of the GFC, about 100% in some places in Sydney and Melbourne up until the peak in Sydney, July 2017, Melbourne, November 2017. We love beating Melbourne. I think we've beaten them on this one, but because we've peaked a bit early, but we've dropped about 20 consecutive months since. So it's just doing what markets do. Markets go up and markets go down. So we all know about that. However, at the same time, starting in about March 2017, one of our big regulators, APRA, the prudential regulator, came out and said, we believe, and I'll paraphrase badly, we believe that there is a bubble in the property market, and we believe that if it bursts, there's going to be grave consequences for the Australian economy because it's such a large input to our GDP. So we're going to do 4 things, and there's a point to this, okay? We're going to do 4 things. Firstly, we're going to cap the growth of investment loans year on year that banks can originate by to 10%. So you can't originate more than 10% investment loans per year. Secondly, we're going to cap the amount of interest-only loans that banks can lend to clients. Now, if you think those of you might have investment properties, interest-only loans is the domain of the negative gearer, so to 30%. We're going to actively ensure that the banking market isn't promoting high lending ratio home loans. So if any of you are my age or more, you probably remember the days of the 100% home loan, 105% loan. Very difficult to get these days. And fourthly, we're going to make sure that all the banking industry is really, when you get a home loan application, stressing them a lot more, scrutinising applications a lot more than we did in the past, because if interest rates rise, we're worried that households won't be able to pay their mortgages. So all pretty grim stuff, and as we've seen, certainly the market has pulled back, certainly in some areas, pretty heavily. And some pundits out there say that those regulatory restrictions put in place have formed a large part of that. But what that means now is that banks were asked to change their lending practices in some aspects. And the large one that we're seeing now is around the topic of living expenses. That's a big one, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. The first tip, I suppose, as a consultant, as an independent, is make sure that you split your banking, split your personal and your business finances. Now, I know it's really awesome and easy to have one card and put everything on there. You know, you get Qantas frequent flyer points and all that cool stuff by just putting on one card, you get a bill, you pay it off, really easy. However, someone at some point will need to split your banking. Now, whether it's your accountant at the end of each year, and my accountant said to me the other day, I love when people don't split their banking because I get to charge them $200 an hour to do it. He had a client that was, he charged $5,000. He's my accountant too. I was like, mate, geez, you're charging a fair bit there, big fella. But it's the reality of it. If you're under an ABN, you'll know in your tax returns you've got your business worksheet and your expenses behind there. So someone's got to pick that apart. Secondly, if you apply for a home loan, a bank is going to have to ask you a whole lot of questions about your living expenses, and this is something I'll talk about now. So those of you who might be looking to buy a home in the future or refinancing an existing loan, this applies to you as well. Back in the day, a bank would say to you when they're assessing a home loan, what's your discretionary spend? So what are you spending on movies and drinks and alcohol and clothes and all the fun stuff that we like to spend all our hard-earned dollars on? And clients would say, I don't know, $2,000 a month. And would also say, what's your non-discretionary spend? Gas, groceries, electricity, all the stuff that you need to keep the lights on, you know, rates, registration on your car, etc. And we'd often say here, oh, I don't know, $4,000 a month in total, $6,000 a month. We'd say, okay, that's probably about right because we've got some benchmark sort of numbers here, HEM, that we use, looks about right. Now we have to ask 12 questions from you. Now, some of the categories, and I've got Phil here, one of our lending specialists, and you hear him all day long saying, what are you spending on Netflix, and what are you spending on Stan and Foxtel, and all that kind of stuff. And the point of it is that as a bank, we need to make sure that we can, should that file get audited, justify the living expense number that we've got in there. So if you haven't got a clear view of your living expenses, that's cool. We can work with you to try and do that, but 9 times out of 10, your living expenses are probably higher than what they should be. And think about an example, a really obvious example that we see quite a lot is as a consultant, you might have a monthly networking event with your network or your circle of influence in your office or a space like this. Now you might spend $500 on wine, champagne, cheese plates, whatever it might be, and put that on your personal credit card. It's a business expense. Ordinarily, your accountant might split that out as an expense. Great. As a one-off expense, even if it's on your personal card, a bank can generally say, okay, that's a business expense. But if it's something you're incurring every month, a bank may say, look, we think this actually is a personal expense. It doesn't look very businessy. It's not stationery or advertising or anything like that. So then you've got to go through a conversation to justify why that actually is a business-related expense. And on the flip side, if you don't get that living expense down to what it actually is, it impacts your borrowing power. So you've really got that choice to make sure that I can split my banking now, whether that's just having two separate credit cards, one for personal, one for business use, which then you can say to a bank, bang, this is my business expense, it's legitimate. Because generally now a bank needs to ask for copies of transaction statements. Generally, if you're borrowing more than about 80 to 85% of your home, they'll need to evidence by bank statements as well. And we saw the other day, maybe about a month ago, a stat. I don't know if I believe it, but it was in, I can't remember which newspaper, it said about 50% of all home loan applications are either being declined or the borrower is getting a loan amount that's less than what they wanted. Now, love it or not, we see a lot of people that go to an auction, especially at the moment, or make a bid on a property before auction, and they make a dummy, really lowball bid. In this market, the vendor will go, great, done. And they'll call us up and go, geez, I need a pre-approval quickly. So if you're time critical, this can really hold up a home loan application if you can't go to a bank and say, here are my expenses, and got all the answers really, really quickly. We've got formal approved loans within a week or so. Conversely, one of our colleagues was up to 1 a.m. the other night trying to pick apart a bank statement over a period of days to try and determine with that client what the living expenses were. And they just didn't know. It was all completely in the best interest of the client, but it did prove challenging. Secondly, home loan considerations. Now, I'm talking largely from a home loan perspective because that's the bulk of what we do at the moment. But some really good insights as to how banks or the industry has looked at contractors or consultants over the past. So what I thought I'd do is, if you don't mind, make your credit analysts within about 2 minutes by explaining what happens when when an application hits the desk of a credit analyst. And there's a reason for this. So even if it's a home loan or even like a credit card, there's a bit of auto decisioning around that these days. However, a credit analyst will look at the 3 C's when they're looking at a home loan. Now, it's the first one being character. Now, not are you of bad character, although we do see every now and again, but more about your willingness to pay is the character. So if you think people that want to borrow money that have a lot of credit defaults against their name, they may have applied for 15 credit cards in the last 12 months. That kind of goes against your character. Whether you're of good character or not, so just bear that in mind. Secondly, the collateral. We are a mortgage lender. We lend against property, so we want to make sure the house exists. There's 4 doors, a window, and a chimney, etc., etc. But the last one is capacity, your ability to pay. Okay, so when a bank works out your income that we think is what you have to pay for the loan, we simply look at your income, take off your living expenses, which you've prepared in advance, and any other debts or outgoings that you might have. And they arrive at a number that we think your income is. Now, being regulated credit, a bank will typically ask for 2 years of tax returns or 2 years of income in the past. We can't forecast income in regulated credit. Perhaps business banks and things can forecast. But in our land, we have to look at the last 2 years generally. So what does that mean if you've gone from PAYG to your own ABN or under a company? Any in the room have gone from PAYG to, yep, lots of hands, great. Actually, I was asking a question. So who experienced a foundation year where you saw a big drop in your first year on your own compared to when you went from your PAYG? Anyone? Okay, you're still in your foundation year. Good on you, I say. That's awesome. Anyone see your income pick up subsequently? You've got, yeah, exactly. So absolutely there's a pattern. You go out on your own, you drop when you get yourself set up, and then your income rises. However, banks don't look at it that way, or banks aren't allowed to look at it that way. So if you've got wildly varying income, a bank will typically take the lower of the two, or they'll typically average them out if the income's rising, or they might take the lower amount plus a small amount as well. However, what banks are increasingly looking to do, because 15 years ago, people on hourly rates, you just couldn't get a loan. We're now, is it 40% in the gig economy these days, Sandy? I think maybe going to 60% in the next 10 years. Yeah, we are seeing consultants that have been paid by the hour for the last 20 years. And they've got magnificent consistency of income, their job type, their industry. They're a wonderful lens where 20 years ago, the banks would have gone, we don't know what to do with this. So I think the important thing for banks now, and there's some of us that lend to what we would call you as white-collar affluent, if that's all right, the professional segment, where you're post-grad qualified, you've gone out on your own, we get it's probably going to increase back in time. So how can we take a more aggressive view in credit policy to perhaps get the loan amount that you need? And so I think from your perspective, there's probably 5 things you can consider if you need to apply for a home loan over the next couple of years, or you're considering refinancing. There's some pretty good rates out there. Sorry, not allowed to talk about it. The first one is, love it or not, really good accounting sometimes doesn't fit with good borrowing. Okay, so if you're wanting to borrow, the idea really, this is not advice, but really try and maximise the income you can demonstrate with source documents. So prepaying expenses in advance, perhaps pushing back income, all that kind of stuff you're okay to do. It does have the impact of potentially reducing your income when a bank is trying to maximise that from your perspective. Secondly, make sure, even if you owe tax at the end of the year, end of March, get your tax returns done and prepared. Your accountants do this all the time. They don't need to lodge them, but then we can use that as a source document if you've hit a foundation year, but the subsequent year is increased, but you don't have to lodge your tax return because you owe money, etc., etc. So we can look at prepared but not lodged tax returns. That's a really, really important one. Secondly to that, we can also take a view at a bank if you've got your BAS up to date. So I'm probably on the accountant side here saying get your paperwork done, but it's really important to make sure your compliance is up to date as well, because we can't forecast. We can say, what, white collar consultant, post grad, say in the industry for the last 15 years, gone out on her own, looking like a pretty good year this person's having. Expert360, the platform, show us a schedule of works you might have agreed to in the future. And also any bills that you've set out there that haven't been paid as well. And a bank can take a pretty good view on that, especially in the consultant space as well, because we know that income can move around. And regardless of whether it's a foundation year or not, you might take 6 months off. And any of you lucky to enough have done that, realise you probably don't get paid during that period as well. So if you've got an explanation to a bank to explain what that dip in income is as well. Maternity leave and paternity leave, all those sorts of things that impact our life cycle. Probably you obviously see a lot more because you are paid on your personal exertion. So I've talked about this one, but good bedfellows are not good tax and good borrowing as well. So just bear that in mind, all right? Any questions at all so far? No, good. How am I going for time? Good. Excellent. Thank you. Now. What we see as a lender in a bank is that, and it's the age old, the more you the more you earn, the more you spend, and then there's a vicious circle. But the more you earn, the more you spend. That's great. We all work hard, we make lots of money, all that kind of stuff. Well, some of us do anyway. But I think the problem is when people apply for a home loan, or we understand that your revenue may not match your expenses as a consultant. It's very important to understand what you're spending your money on, and we would see when speaking to people on lots and lots of money about home loans and things, they just don't know what they spend their money on. The average Australian spends about $2,500 on coffee. The average Sydney-sider spends about $1,500 on tolls. Those of you on the road would probably spend way more than that. A lot of people don't know that. And I won't say which bank, but if you've still got that old key card that gives you nothing but a paper statement every month, I think out there's massive, massive, awesome tech change in the banking space. Artificial intelligence, the whole fourth industrial revolution around understanding what you're spending your money on. We're one of the banks that has a pretty good platform as well, not talking about our product, but understanding what you're spending your money on. We've got the same. Anyone got Netflix here? Isn't it funny how when you go and look for a movie, it serves up a movie that they think you might like, We use the same type of technology to kind of forecast what your spend might be over the next 6 months, for example. We can categorise what you're spending on alcohol and bars and clothes and coffee and tolls and all those sorts of things, with the main impact that it helps you understand what you're spending your money on, setting individual budgets to make sure that if you do have those tardy banks or whoever it is you're working for that don't pay on time, that you can navigate through. A really important stat, I'm not sure why, but it's $20,000. If you can put that away to the side in a rolling term deposit or into an offset account, apparently that adds to your financial well-being. So it helps you navigate through rocky patches. So make sure you understand what you spend your money on, because we always set these challenges to all of the workplace banking partners that we have around. See if you can save yourself $5,000 a year just by reducing spend in certain categories. So some really, really good tech stuff out there Unbelievably really powerful tech stuff. This is one that I like as well. I talked about at the start. I've never met an accountant who doesn't want to tell us about the awesome structure they've put in place for a client, especially when they're applying for a home loan. So, a common strategy we might see from those consultants who've been around a while is you've got a service trust or maybe a family trust you might be distributing to some various family entities, or you might just have an ABN as well, sole trader. Sometimes it's really hard to pick through the income. If we look for your personal tax returns, often it's not shown there because income may have been distributed to various entities. So if you've got a friendly accountant that can give us a corporate tree, an entity map, mud map, whatever you want to call it, that maps out all of your entities, those of you who have a corporate structure or something a little bit more complicated for various reasons, we can look at that and within about 5 seconds work out, great, here's the flow of income, yep, we understand we got it. And an accountant will always want to tell you all their awesome structuring and things like that, so they're always really helpful. I don't think they tend to charge you for it when we speak to them for home loans. They might. But those of you on sole traders, for example, with your business worksheet, make sure that your expenses, you've given your accountant all of the expenses that they can put in there to deduct against your income. But also, if they're all in there, there are a whole lot of ones that we can add back to your income to maximise your borrowing power. So think of things like depreciation against various items. They're one-off expenses. We might be able to put that back into your income to boost your borrowing power. Excess contributions into super, fantastic strategy, of course, Kirstin. But you made that choice, so we might be able to put that back onto your income as well. And some other one-off deductions as well. So make sure that your accountant has everything, but also they're able to provide us with that expense worksheet as well. Companies and trusts, we'll ask for 2 years of tax returns personally and also from your corporate structure as well. If we can't see income, it's really cool to see the various bits and pieces, worksheets in your company tax returns as well. So make sure that, importantly, they're not available, but your accountant does them as soon as possible. Because you may be aware, even if you have a tax bill, you obviously don't have to pay that until a certain amount of time. So if we can see some of your compliance, it's really, really important. So accountants, if you've got a really, really good one, they get your stuff done on time. They also charge you on time. Great, but it's really important. We see a really, really successful loan application where an accountant is absolutely happy to talk to us. It might only take 10 minutes or an email, and it has sped up a loan application quite substantially. So really important. Obviously, they need to push you to get all of your tax returns and other bits and pieces done. I think I've used up my time, but I wanted to quickly talk about the partnership that we have with Expert360. We have a retail banking offer for you all. I think the main thing is that transaction account recently won the best, you should tell me if I'm wrong, the best international card, I think it's called. Yeah, that's right. So overseas, there's no ATM fees and all that kind of stuff, so travellers love it. Credit cards can obtain Qantas frequent flyer points, and there's also a discount for life off the home loan. Even if you've got an existing home loan, just check the rate, make sure you're not paying anything too high. Tell them that Macquarie Bank offered you something a lot cheaper and see if they can give you a better rate. You see it a lot, please. But importantly though, this is the big thing about tonight, is we have on the website back here called smarterbanking.com, or macquarie.com/smarterbanking, we have our expertise hub. 202 easy to read articles, 1,000 to 2,000 words, purely designed to increase your financial literacy, whether it's about a summary of the budget or interest rates, simple things like how to avoid your credit card being skimmed in Christmas time, 5 things I wish I knew before attending an auction, what should I do when I use a buyer's agent, there's all sorts of bits and pieces. So if you've got time, and I know you're all really busy, make sure you have a look at this expertise hub, because there's some pretty cool stuff in there as well. Okay. Otherwise, please have a chat to us afterwards, give us a call, but I hope there were some tips and tricks in relation to you as independents that you can take away and think about that may improve your personal finances. But otherwise, I think after a short break we're going to hear from Kirstin about all the awesome things that the superannuation accounts can provide us. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks everybody, it's great to be here. Hi. So, as we've just covered, what we're going to be going through tonight is to help you all understand a little bit more about superannuation and how it impacts on you, and in particular, how you can think about it as an independent. And then for those of you who haven't already made a conscious choice about where your super is invested, give you some different approaches for how you might weigh up that decision. So I was going to start by just giving you a bit of background on me and why you should listen to me when I talk about superannuation, because it's not always the most sexy topic, but it's something that that I'm very passionate about. So I grew up in Tweed Heads, which is an idyllic beachside place up near Queensland. It was a very sort of sun-filled lifestyle, lots of swimming and surf life saving. And at the same time, though, my family was very poor. So we didn't have a lot of money to put aside for savings, do all this kind of cool stuff. But we did have time and skills. And so we were always involved in volunteering and surf life saving, teaching swimming to the local surf club kids and to the schools as well. And so that kind of really grounded me in this idea that community is something really important, and it's something that we can all invest in, and each of us has a role to play to make our communities stronger. I moved down to Sydney when I started university and really found my tribe of people volunteering at the university union events and doing a bunch of other stuff at uni as well. I spent way too long at university, all in all. I was there for 8 years because I loved it so much. And then I went from university and did 10 years in professional services. So started out at Freehills and then went to Bain & Company. So I was in Australia and Canada. I was a financial services specialist in both of those roles. And financial services to me is something that I care a lot about because, again, it has that community connection. All of us need banks. All of us have superannuation. So it's something that unites everybody regardless of who we are or what we do. So at the same time, though, I was kind of feeling, some of these big questions, which I'm sure a lot of you have asked yourselves about when you made the decision to leave corporate as well. But, what actually excites me? What am I here for? What kind of impact do I want to have on the world? And for me, those questions started gaining a lot of traction and a lot of importance once I had my child. And in particular, a lot of the stuff that I was reading about climate change and the effects of climate change, meaning that by 2040, the predictions from the latest reports are that there'll be worldwide famines, food shortages, wildfires. So these are the things that are going to affect my child's future. She's going to be younger than I am now when that future happens. And so that really led me to do some soul searching and think about why I was spending all of my time on big corporate problems instead of doing things that would actually have an impact on that community that she was going to grow up into. So I discovered Future Super, financial services with a strong social impact focus, and it just felt like an absolutely natural move. So I managed to find myself an introduction to the founders, went across initially on a short-term contract, and then ended up converting my role to permanent. So now I'm the managing director, overseeing the member-facing part of the business. So if any of you interact with the contact centre, they all work for me, the marketing team, technology team. And then I work alongside the two co-founders of the business as well. So absolutely love it. And, I have a real soft spot for Expert360 and what each of you are doing, because that same sort of feeling of jumping off from a sure thing and regular income and going out on your own and doing something that feels a bit risky at the time, that hopefully, brings you a lot more satisfaction, I think is something I have a huge amount of respect. First off, superannuation is really simple. So for those of you that are here, how many of you have made a conscious decision about where your super is or have looked at your superannuation at any point in the last 12 months? Great. More than I would have expected. That's excellent. Does anyone, do you guys feel that you understand superannuation, how it works? Is it a bit of a complex mystery? Some yeses, some nos. I'll spin through this bit. If it's a bit of repetition, give me bored faces and I'll go faster. But superannuation at its most basic is your money for your retirement. So it's money that you're putting aside today so that future you can live off once you get older. For working Australians, the amount of the contribution is 9.5%. And so that's 9.5% of a regular income is compulsorily put into superannuation for the future. So our super system's been going since the early 90s, thanks to Paul Keating for that one. As I said, 9.5% moving up to 12% by 2025. That date keeps being pushed around as politicians bounce it around between them. And when we put all of our superannuation together in Australia, we've got $2.8 trillion worth of super. That makes us the third largest pool of investable assets in the world, which is massive. So us little tiny Australia have the third largest pool of money to be invested anywhere in the world. So it is a huge thing, and for each of us to take control of where that money is sitting and make sure that it works for us as well as for the world that we want to see. On a really scary note, around 75% of the 1.7 million Australians who are self-employed aren't making super contributions. So for you guys, you know, it's easy when you're not sure what your income's going to look like, when it's lumpy, it's easy to deprioritise super. But I want to hopefully give you some information tonight which will help you put super back at the top of your priority list. So the superannuation system is great. It's the envy of many other markets in the world, but it's definitely not perfect. And so there are a number of flaws in the system. You've probably heard a lot about people with multiple accounts, especially coming out of the Royal Commission. It's been something that's been talked about a lot. So a lot of people early in their careers, they'll have a superannuation account from each of their crappy part-time jobs that they did while they're at uni, a different one for their first job when they're working, and then another one for their next job. Each of those super accounts are eating up balances with fees, and so if you're paying fees on multiple accounts, over time you'll disproportionately be losing versus having it all in the one place. Time out of the workforce, so particularly for people who are taking breaks to raise children or care for relatives or take other sort of lengthy career breaks. Because superannuation is linked to your income, if you're not earning an income, then you don't have super building up. And so similarly with non-traditional work models where it's not a traditional income, it can have the same effect on a superannuation balance as time out of the workforce. And that effect kind of looks like this. So on this chart, the green is average men's balances and the blue is average women's. In Australia at the moment, women retire with around 47% of the super of men. And that's largely due to having career breaks around the time of raising children, if they have elderly relatives, as well as working part-time or not making it to senior levels of the organisation. So a number of complex factors there, which people much smarter than me have written many more words about. But the effect is the same as if you're working in a non-traditional work model and you don't have a regular income coming in, or you don't have an income during those certain years of your life, or you're doing it, or you might have a big year one year and a smaller year another year, and result in sort of those different amounts of contributions coming in. So, 4 quick things you can do about your super. I'll talk you through these quickly and then we'll go through one by one. So, the first thing is to get a sense of what you're going to need when you retire. So see the future, look forward to what you're going to need, and then work backwards from there. The second one, use tax to your advantage. We've already heard a few good tax tips tonight, but there are plenty around super as well. Start now, manage your cash flow so that you can actually put aside small amounts rather than having to really rush towards the later stages of your career. And choose wisely when it comes to your super fund. So consolidating into a single account and choosing a fund that's going to deliver the best outcomes for you in your retirement. We'll talk through each of these things one by one. Any questions before I get into this? All right, let's get into it. So see the future, 12 zeros, there you go. What do we need to retire? So this little chart here, those of you at the back might not be able to read it, but this is the Australian Superannuation Funds Association recommendations of what the average person will need to retire. So for single people looking to have a modest retirement, it's around $27,000 per year. For singles looking to have a comfortable retirement, it's around $42,000. It's higher for couples. But what this assumes is that you own your home and you don't have any debt. And so that's not something that is as standard for people working today as it was for people working 20 or 30 years ago. So those numbers might not necessarily take into account the reality of having to pay rent or having debt into your retirement. Another approach is to estimate based on 50 to 75% of your pre-retirement income. So depending on what your income is, there could be a really big difference between 42,000 and what 50 to 75% of your income is. And so that's what you're going to need to have each year coming out of your super or a combination of super and pension to fund your retirement. ASIC's Money Smart has a bunch of really great tools that are free and really easy to use. So once you've got a sense of what you're going to need to retire into, you can jump onto this website and just search ASIC Money Smart, and it'll be the first hit that comes up. And they have a calculator that helps you work out what superannuation income you'll be able to get based on where you are now. So forecasting forward from a number of factors, and you can see here your age, your income at the moment, your desired age of retirement, your super balance at the moment, the amount of contribution that you're putting in, and then you have the option as well to add in if you're making personal contributions on top of that. So what this does is it spits out a chart which tells you, based on your super today, how old you are and how much we think you're going to earn over the next between 20 and 40 years of your career. We think you're in a position of being able to get however many dollars per year. So, $20,000 per year based on where you are now. And it also gives you the opportunity as well to then go back and say, shit, 20,000 is a bit less than I want it to be. What would that look like if instead I started putting in $50 a week into my super account now? So you can play with all of those assumptions and see how that changes what you'll have when you retire. Tax. Use tax to your advantage. So if you do have a regular income, if you're one of those people that's partly PAYG, partly an independent, or if you have other sort of arrangements in the way you get paid, you can put aside tax as part of your pre-tax income. So that can be a really good way to bring down your pre-tax income, but also the tax system is set up that you get taxed on superannuation at a lower rate to what you do on your income tax. And so the money that you put into super gets taxed at 15% as a flat rate until you earn over $300,000 per year. So depending on what your income tax rate is, that can be a really, really effective way of putting aside money for your future and getting a nice tax return as well. There is a little bit of admin that you have to do about this. You have to fill in a form that is a notice of intent to claim to your super fund, but any of your super funds will be able to help you with that process. And so this is up to the first 25,000 contributed. So for each of you that are working on an independent contract basis, you can take money out of those contracts and put it aside for your superannuation in a similar way to what you would if you were earning a regular income. And for that first 25,000 that you put in, then it will be taxed at 15% rather than whatever normal rate you would be on. And start now. So I'm sure everyone has heard this before, but the power of compound interest really does have a big impact when it comes to superannuation. So when you're thinking about how do I actually get my income from my super using that Money Smart calculator up to a level where I think I can actually live off it, thinking about how much you could actually put aside today in small amounts can really help. And this chart really demonstrates that. So the light blue bars here are if you're investing $40 a week into super from the age of 25. And the dark blue bars are if you're investing $100 a week from the age of 40. So basically, smaller amounts being contributed over a longer period of time actually results in a really massive difference in the amount of money that you have available at your retirement. So even if you say, I can't put aside money now, but I'll wait until I'm a little bit older and then I can put aside more, it's still not going to have the same impact as if you're able to put aside even a few dollars a week now, because the interest compounding on that amount over the full duration of your career will mean that you're in a much better position. So pick the right super fund. All right, you guys are all super experts. How did you make the decision about which super fund to go with? What things did you think about when you were choosing a super fund? Fees, yep, good one. Returns, yep. Anything else? Yep, so the sort of general vibe of the fund. Non-Big Four, yep. Especially in these Royal Commission times. Yeah, so you've got most of them. So fees and returns are the big ones that get talked about quite a lot. I also want to talk about investment strategy, and I want to talk about ethics. So again, we'll go through these one at a time, and I'll give you my thoughts on it, and then happy to take questions as we go through. So fees in super are a bit of a minefield. If you've tried to look into fees and tried to compare one fund to another, you're going to have a really hard time because everyone calls their fees different things. They'll break it down into investment fees or administrative fees. They might have a percentage fee or a dollar-based fee. So it makes it really difficult to try and compare one fund to another. You can do it by looking in the PDS because all super funds are required to have what the fee is for an average $50,000 balance, but it does take a bit of legwork in order to figure it out. Product disclosure statement. So the chart on the left here is what I was able to pull together with a little bit of Googling around what the difference in fees was. So industry funds on the left typically have lower fees. They're not for profit. Superannuation funds, whereas retail funds are profit generating, and so the fees are typically a little bit higher. So sort of roughly 0.8 to 1.2 for industry funds, and so anywhere between 1% and 2% for retail funds. So question, is a lower fee always better? Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That was going to be my suggestion. So both of you said the same thing, which is awesome. So is a lower fee always better? No. And the reason for that is you could be paying a super low fee and not be getting any value for that fee. So you're effectively throwing money away. Or you could be paying a high fee to a fund that is doing really great things with your money, generating an awesome return and leaving you much better off than if you were paying that lower fee. So point number 2 is returns. And so returns are basically the money that your fund earns for you by investing your money into other things. That may be from if they invest in shares, getting dividends from those shares. If they buy at one price and sell at another price, then the money left over goes into your returns as well. Important disclaimer, always have to have a disclaimer. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. But there's a couple of things you need to know when you're looking at returns. The first one is that returns are generally reported post-fee. So as you both identified, what that means is when you're looking at one fund versus another and comparing returns, it's after the fees have already been deducted. So it's actually a much easier way of getting a comparison between how funds are going than trying to wade through all of that information about fees. In theory, returns are linked to the risk weighting for the particular investment option. So terms like growth tend to be things that are a bit more aggressive, higher risk, the theory goes leads to higher reward, whereas defensive or conservative tend to be things that are a little bit less risky, and so the returns that they're likely to get are likely to be lower as well. So again, past performance not a reliable indicator, and the risk can go the other way as well. So higher risk can also mean that it might be more likely that they lose money. But the way fund management works is you try and allocate across a variety of different types of things so that if you lose on one, hopefully you win on another. Did you have a question? Yeah, so good question. The question just for the recording was basically, is it better for younger people to take a higher risk option and older people to take a more conservative option? And yes, as you rightly point out, I can't give financial advice. However, the received wisdom is that that's a pretty common approach. And the reason for that is if you're in your 20s and there's a global financial crisis and your money was invested in high risk things and a lot of your money gets wiped off, you've got time left to rebuild that balance. Whereas if you're in your 60s and that happens, then you've got nothing. And so if you're older, you might want to be in something that's a bit more conservative in order to make sure that those peaks and troughs are kind of flattened out. Whereas if you're younger, you might be willing to accept the risk of loss in order to to get that the opportunity to get higher growth. That said, though, people are living longer and longer. So if you're in your 60s, you may still have 20 or 30 years worth of having that money invested. And so investing it into a really conservative option may not be the best approach. So generally, seek financial advice or talk to someone who can give you advice on your personal circumstances. Any other questions at this point? Cool. Well, related to the long-term investment, the nature of super as a long-term investment, I want to talk about investment strategy. So for many of us, unless we have some kind of really bad financial outcome, we're not going to be seeing any of the money in our super for 20, 40, 50 years. And so when you fast forward 20, 40, 50 years, as I said before, climate change is one of the really big long-term trends that we're all grappling with. What is this going to mean for our lives and for our economies? And superannuation is not immune from that. So you can see here a couple of headlines. Again, it took me about 5 seconds to pull these off a quick Google search, but ticking time bomb, is your super at risk from climate change? One of the super funds is actually being sued by a member for not disclosing what they're doing to protect his super from climate change risk. And so it's a really big thing to think about, and you as members should be asking your super funds, or at least looking to see what it is that they're investing in to protect your money from the risk of climate change. And if I can talk you through a little bit the economics of it, I think many people think of climate change as an ethical thing. It's not just an ethical thing, it's actually a really important economic issue as well. What we have up here is 2 circles. So the red circle is what we call the carbon bubble. That is the amount of carbon that would be released if all of the known reserves of fossil fuels get burnt. And the blue circle is the remaining carbon budget. So that's how much we're able to burn if the world is going to stay under 2 degrees of global warming, which is pretty much the level at which, even if it's 2 degrees, we might still be in a lot of trouble. But if it's higher than 2 degrees, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So what you can see here, the big thing that jumps out at you right away is that blue circle is way smaller than the red circle. So fossil fuel companies, their market capitalisation, their balance sheets, their earning projections are all based around them being able to burn that red circle worth of fossil fuel and release that amount of carbon. So they're valued as though they're going to be able to burn that red circle worth of fossil fuel, but a survivable planet means that they can only burn the blue. And so what that means for you guys as investors through your super fund is if you've got superannuation invested in fossil fuel companies, at some point there's going to be a massive write down in the valuation of those entities, and your superannuation invested in them is going to lose money. So that's if you believe that climate change is real and it's happening and we're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. And that's the economic justification for Future Super not investing in fossil fuels. We take a responsible approach to our members' funds, and we keep them out of things that we believe within the lifetime of our members' investments are going to result in a big loss in their value. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Big mining companies, fossil fuel companies that according to the political situation in the world, if the global community is going to come together and stay underneath 2 degrees of warming, those companies are going to have to stop burning the fossil fuels that they are budgeting and planning to burn. So the last thing that I want to talk about is ethics. And the question here is, what kind of community do you want to retire into? So as a superannuation fund, super funds invest in companies. $2.8 trillion means that super funds actually own 50% of the shares on the Australian stock market. The companies they invest in use that money to grow, and so where your super is invested, excuse me, will help inform which companies are going to be successful by the time you retire. And so thinking about what kind of future you want to live in, you should also be thinking about the ethics of those investments, because the world that you retire into will be the world that is shaped by the superannuation investments made by your super fund on your behalf. At Future Super, we take our ethics really seriously. We have a really strong negative screen, which is that we don't invest in fossil fuel companies, service providers to fossil fuels, gambling, tobacco, armaments, military, nuclear, live animal export, things that we don't want to see having a prominent place in the world where we retire into. And instead, we look to the industries of the future and try and think about what's going to be needed in that world that we'll retire into. So we look at renewable energy, recycling, resource conservation, social infrastructure, things that are going to be building stronger communities and making the world a better place to live in. And investing ethically doesn't have to cost you personally. So a lot of people think that if they're making an ethical decision, they're making a trade-off between what they're going to get personally and what's going to be right for the community around them. But this chart here on the right is just an example. There are many others and lots of really detailed research papers about this. But what you can see is the blue line at the top is our global shares index, so ethically screened global shares index. The orange line in the middle there is the Australian shares index. The grey line is the ASX 300. and the yellow line is the MSCI index. And so you can see they kind of follow pretty similar paths, but what we've been able to do, at least over the most recent period, and again, past performance, not an indicator, is that you don't have to trade off ethics when it comes to return. Actually, in a world of Royal Commission, into banking sector, Royal Commission into ageing, these kind of ethical questions are now coming to the forefront in ways that they haven't before. Things like Facebook, when it got involved in the Cambridge Analytica scandal, lost a bunch of money off its bottom line as well. So ethics more and more is becoming something that consumers are using to factor into their decisions, and so it's something that actually has an impact on the profitability of those companies as well. All right, that's all from me. So in summary, see the future, use tax to your advantage, start saving now and choose wisely where you're going to put your super. Any questions?
Guys, thank Kirstin so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our very first financial wellbeing event for freelancers. Please stick around for a drink and help us finish this beautiful cheese. And please, one thing we love more than our consultants is feedback. So the more and more we partner with the various organisations such as Macquarie Bank, Future Super, we want to hear from you guys. As we said earlier, we're about making this work for you. So anything you want to share, please keep the feedback coming. Again, a really special thanks to Macquarie Bank and Future Super. Kirstin, you make it sound so simple, and we're so lucky to partner with you. So thank you again. Good to see you back at the office. Guys, enjoy the night.